Once she got her mouth open wide at its widest point, I would basically have to quickly like put her on my breast really, really fast.
I got no drip in my pocket. Must have forgot it, or maybe I already lost it.
Hey y'all, I'm back with another video, and this time we're talking about breastfeeding, which is a subject I really wanted to talk about because I feel like we spend so much time preparing for birth, focusing on pregnancy, enjoying that process, and then once you give birth to the baby, it's kind of like figure it all out on your own. There's already so much we have to deal with: body changes, possibly surgery, healing, sleep changes, all of these things. And breastfeeding is definitely something that kind of falls under the bus. And I think that a lot of us tend to look at it as like, oh, it's natural, so I don't need to think much about it. When it is natural, but there's also some preparation and techniques and a lot that goes into it that if you're not familiar with it, it can really make the process very difficult. So I wanted to share my journey in hopes that my story will help someone out or help you prepare for it, know what to look out for, or just to even like form a camaraderie or, you know, just like a little group of support. So I am going to share my story. I'm also going to go over some things that I think a lot of moms face when breastfeeding. So almost like a little Q&A section. And then I'm also going to tell you guys everything you need for breastfeeding and pumping at the end of this video. So make sure you stay tuned and watch all of it. But let me introduce myself. My name is Jessica. I have 2 kids. I have a 3-year-old daughter who I breastfed for 20 months, exclusively breastfed for 20 months. And I have a son who's 12 months old, and we are still on our breastfeeding journey. Altogether, I've breastfed for almost 3 years of my life. So I'm definitely like very comfortable in this breastfeeding area. With that being said, let me start with my daughter, Leia, and our journey, because that was the struggle, my first. With her going in, I really did not prepare for breastfeeding at all. Like I said, I thought it was natural, so I'm just like, what is there to prepare for? And not only that, I was working as an RN, and I just started in labor and delivery. So I was like in orientation or training, I should say. And I was able to see a couple moms breastfeed, and I even went to breastfeeding classes where they just teach you like the generic information and the basics so that we know what we're talking about when we're dealing with moms. So I just thought, like, you know, okay, how hard can this be? I had planned for a completely natural birth. I was in labor for like almost 36 hours trying to push her out, but she was a big baby, so I ended up having to have a C-section. And sure enough, she came out 9 pounds 2 ounces, so she was very big. But because I had a C-section, I wasn't able to like bond with her immediately. They couldn't hand her to me, but you know, I couldn't start breastfeeding. So they had to sew me back up. And during that time, my daughter went back to the postpartum room with my husband. And so they were having their whole little like skin to skin moment. And then like 30 minutes later, I came back into the postpartum room. And so now it was time for me to bond with Leia. So I was familiar with it, and I knew, okay, let me take down my gown, let me put her on my skin so we can have some skin to skin, which is really good for bonding, milk stimulation, all those things. And sure enough, I knew, okay, now we're about to breastfeed. And I was really excited to do it because I'm just like, I don't know, that's like, it's like initiating you into momhood. So no, birth is initiating you into it, but that's another story. So I know the next thing was to get a good latch. So I was holding her in cradle position. I put her up on my breast, and she latched perfectly. I mean, it was a really good start. She was started to suck, got her milk out, fell asleep. So I knew she was satisfied after, and breastfeeding went well. I think later that day, the lactation consultant came in to check, and she also said everything looks good. So I was just very happy to know that like we mastered the breastfeeding situation. But since I had a C-section, I was in there for like 2 to 3 days postpartum. On the 2nd or 3rd day on my way home, I was like, okay, let me just peek at my nipples. I don't know, I just want to look at them, see what it looks like. And it had like a white line going across the nipple, and I was like, what is that? Is that normal? I don't really know because I'm new to this. And I remember doing a Google search, and they said that that could be an indicator of a bad latch, but I was like, I don't have a bad latch. The lactation consultant said the latch was good. Latch looked good to me. She's getting milk. I'm not in pain. So I was kind of like threw it out the window. Like, I'll look out for it, but that doesn't really mean anything to me. Sure enough, by like 2 days later, I started having some pain, and the white got worse, or the white cracking got worse. And I was like, okay, maybe this is starting to be a problem, but I don't know what to do. Like, I looked up, okay, how to get a better latch, but I'm like, well, I'm doing what I'm supposed to do. And then the next day came, the pain was really intense, and then I started bleeding. So the cracking got so bad that it actually became a wound, and I started to bleed out of it. So at that point, The pain was so bad that when she would wake up, when Leia would wake up, I would just be like having so much anxiety because I knew, okay, she's up now, she has to feed, and I'm gonna have to sit there through this intense pain. Oh my God, I just, thinking about it like freaks me out. It was so bad, but I knew I had to feed my baby. And like, you're already going through all this new motherhood stuff, so to have this anxiety around feeding does not help at all. So I just, I kept putting her on my breast too, and I Googled it and it said it's safe to still feed them, even if you have like, bleeding or cracked nipples, although it doesn't feel good, but you can. So I kept doing it, and then I remember by that Sunday, which was like a week later, I was like, I can't do this anymore. I can't. Like, there's no way it's supposed to be like this, and there's no way a human is supposed to breastfeed multiple times a day and endure this pain. So I was like doing a intense search for a lactation consultant near me. Who can I call? I'm on Google, I'm on Yelp, and I found one lady, and I just called her and I started telling her about everything that was going down, how I was feeling, my whole breastfeeding journey for the first week, and I just started bawling, crying. Like, literally, I don't know this lady, and I'm on the phone with her, and I just started saying, I can't do this, it hurts so bad. I mean, I was just going in, because you as a mom, if you intend on breastfeeding, it's something that you feel like it's a connection with your baby, and it's something you feel like you're supposed to do. And so when it's not going right, it almost feels like a failure. And not even that aspect, you're also feeding your baby and providing, like, you are their nutrition. So to feel like it's not going well is it just adds another layer of anxiety to everything. So I was on the phone with this lady bawling. I didn't even care at that point. And she was like, okay, calm down. We're gonna work it out. She told me to pump on that breast for some relief and only latch my daughter on the other breast, which was better. So I'm like, okay, I did that. It did work and provide some relief. And she was there the very next morning. So when she got there, of course, was like coming to check everything, see how the latch was. They check for certain markers like weight to make sure the baby is gaining. Because if the baby is gaining weight, then that's an indicator that the baby is getting milk. She checks for tongue ties because I believe there's something that can happen in the mouth. I'm not no expert on tongue ties, but I believe they have like some kind of like attachment to their tongue and the mouth that prevents their tongue from being able to move properly to have a good latch. She checked the actual latch. We talked about how many wet diapers she was having. Basically, everything looked good. We crossed everything out. So the only thing that was left was the actual latch. And so I showed her how I latch, and she was like, okay, you're latching okay, but it's not a deep enough latch. And what happens is when the latch isn't deep enough, your nipple is like, let's say this is their mouth and this is your nipple. Your nipple is supposed to go all the way in the mouth when it's like that. So the nipple should be all the way in there. But when you don't have a deep latch, it's kind of at like, the front of the mouth. And so this part gets squished down and really flat. And then so this ridge or edge, which is like pancaked, it begins to it's flattened out and pulled a lot, and so that's when you get that cracking, which eventually gets to bleeding and has pain. When it's deep, it has room to, I guess, like round out and not be so flat or whatever. So please, like I said, I am not an expert. You can, research it and stuff or talk to a lactation consultant, but this is just like my general understanding of it. So basically the goal was, we gotta get this deep latch. That was a whole thing. Like, so when she was helping me with the deep latch, I would hold my breast. We're beginning there. I would hold my breast, and then I would support Leia's head. And once she got her mouth open, wide, at its widest point, I would basically have to quickly, like put her on my breast really, really fast. She started out doing it, and then I had to mimic her. And at first, I was like, this is a little aggressive. Like, I don't know, is this safe? But it worked. And I guess I had to do it so fast because I had to catch her mouth at the widest point. So yeah, I would latch her in there, and even though I was experiencing pain, I can immediately feel less pain when she had the proper latch, even though, it was still like cracked and bleeding and everything. So that was really good. That was a huge relief, but I knew that this wasn't like an immediate cure. My body was gonna have to heal, so I was still going to have to endure the pain a little bit longer while my nipple was getting better. So after that, things slowly improved. Day by day, my nipple felt a little bit better. I would say, if I'm being honest, it probably at maybe around like 5-6 weeks is when I truly felt no pain. When it felt like if I'm stuck on the back of my hand, like just felt like nothing. Before that, I had the pain had to go away. So that just took a while for me. And let me just put it out there, breastfeeding should not be painful, but you can have soreness, which is totally normal, but pain you should not be feeling. So if you feel a discomfort or like some soreness, don't think like, oh my God, I'm gonna have cracked nipples. But if it is painful, then that is not a good thing. You know, that's a bad sign. So yeah, I was really happy to find that everything improved. After that, I really had like no issues with Leia. It was amazing. Like I said, I breastfed for 20 months. I had no problems. It became so easy. I fell in love with breastfeeding. It was the easiest thing ever. You know, I knew that the food was right there. It was free. She fell asleep on my breast, which was a whole nother topic because people tell you don't let them sleep on your breast. They have all these rules. And for me, it worked. Falling asleep on the breast was like magic. I was like, why would anyone tell me not to do this? It works beautifully. So I breastfed her to sleep up until 20 months and it was like magic. Just putting that out there that if you choose to do that, don't feel guilty about it. You know, if that's your choice. But yeah, I had a very good breastfeeding experience with her, and I'll tell you about how we weaned after I tell you about my experience with Mello. So with my son, he was born a year ago, and when we were in the hospital, I was basically super comfortable. When they gave me him to latch, I was like, boom, we got this. Immediately started that deep latch, grabbed him, put him on. I'm like, look, we're gonna get this immediately because I refuse to go through that again. And literally there's not even much to say because I just had no problems with him. I did experience some soreness, which is expected, but nothing like the pain I had the first time. And I think that came with me having experience and knowing what to do. I have friends who breastfed and had no issues whatsoever. Like came natural and easy to them. They literally never encountered any pain or difficulties / problems. So it's not like that's unheard of. Hopefully, I would hope that that's more of like the common route versus my situation or people who have difficulties. The only issues that I had with him are minor things you can encounter. So the first thing was I had an oversupply with him in the beginning. So Leia, I made exactly what I needed. With Mello, I produced a lot of milk. My breasts were like engorged and I would feed him on one and he wouldn't even empty the breast and the other one would still be full of milk. Both breasts just weren't being fully emptied, which was kind of good because I was able to build a little bit of a stash in the beginning, but at the same time, that's uncomfortable because my breasts are like super full and hard. So you can look at that as an issue or not, but that was something I did deal with Mello. So don't expect to produce like a bunch of milk in the beginning. If you're providing just enough for your baby and your breasts are not engorged, that's completely normal. Don't expect to have some huge stash in the freezer. That is not normal. I don't want to say it's not normal. It's not common. It's not common to have a big old stash of like hundreds of bags of milk in the fridge. That means you're producing a lot more milk than your baby needs, and generally speaking, your body produces exactly what your baby needs. Because basically the way it works is like it's like a feedback loop. And you can look at it like there's 3 scenarios. One is that your body produces milk, your baby sucks on your breast to get the milk out, and then there's a lot of milk left over, so your body's like, okay, I'm making too much, let me cut back on how much I'm making. The opposite end, it can be that your body produces milk, your baby is sucking, your breasts get empty, but they continue to suck even though they're empty because they want more food, and so then that tells your body, okay, I need to make more milk. Or the perfect scenario would be your body makes milk, your baby empties your breast, and once it's empty, they're done, they unlatch, and that's it. Your body knows, okay, I'm making the right amount of milk. That can get a little tricky when it comes to like pumping and stuff, but I'm gonna talk about that more later when I do my little like Q&A section. But yeah, so with him, I had a little bit of an oversupply in the beginning. And then the second thing I encountered was some nipple confusion. So with him, I always make sure not to introduce a pacifier or a bottle in the very early days because they say it can cause nipple confusion because the latch to the breast and the latch to the bottle nipple or pacifier are very different. So I did wait a little bit. I introduced it a few weeks in, maybe 3 weeks in. I think they actually recommend waiting like 4 or 6 weeks, but I did start a little bit early. So like 3 weeks, I think it was, I started introducing a pacifier. And because of that, I could notice that his latch to my breast was changing. It wasn't a big problem, but I did notice it, and I would have to unlatch him, allow him to open his mouth correct, and then put him back on my breast. Eventually, he relearned how to latch and got back to normal, but that was something else that I encountered. Since we're on that, I might as well go ahead and talk about the issues that you can encounter with the bottles. So there's two things. One is the nipple confusion, and then two, milk tends to come out of a bottle much faster. So you want to make sure that you're not feeding them with a bottle very early, because they may end up developing preference for the bottle because they're getting much more milk much easier than with your breast, where they have to kind of like work for it a little bit. And then the last issue I had was that, during that whole RSV craze, Mello ended up getting RSV. And during that time, because he was sick, he didn't want to feed very much. The times that he wouldn't feed when he was supposed to, what I should have done was I should have pumped the milk out so I could tell my body to still make the same amount of milk. But instead, I would let time pass. I would skip those feeds. If he didn't enter my breast, I was like, whatever. And so my milk supply ended up dropping a lot. And when he was feeling better and ready to eat again, my breast wasn't making the amount of milk that he needed. So he had to suck on my breast a lot to stimulate the milk production. And I had to also like pump to help bring it back up. So if you ever encounter that issue, you want to make sure that you are pumping every time he or she is supposed to feed. So if your baby feeds just about every 3 hours, then every 3 hours, you're gonna wanna make sure you pump. And the best way to do it is to double pump. So you're gonna get the phalange, put it on both breasts, and at the same time, pump all the milk out. And if you wanna like go the extra mile, they recommend pumping like 15 minutes after your breasts are empty, so you can really get that stimulation and make sure that you're not decreasing your supply. But that did happen with Mello. Like I said, everything turned out to be okay, but these are just issues that you may encounter along the way. So I just want to make sure, I discuss it. But other than that, smooth sailing, great experience. So of course, weaning is a big thing when you breastfeed. It's like, how is it gonna happen? Because I just love my breast so much, and the milk and the comfort. So I know like a lot of moms get like really scared. I will say I had a good experience weaning. Obviously, I haven't weaned Mello as yet, but with Leia, it was good, and it was a very like natural, gradual process. Now, I do feel like weaning is very unique to your situation and like how often you breastfeed, what the breastfeeding relationship is, at what age you choose to wean. But for me, I exclusively breastfed. Like I barely use bottles at all with my daughter. But what happened was, so when they're babies, they breastfeed a lot. And then at 6 months, they get introduced to solids, and they're still breastfeeding majority of the time, but you give them food taste here and there. And then by the older months, like 10 to 12 months, the feeds became almost like more for comfort than for real nutrition. Let me be clear on that. So what I would do is my daughter would feed when she wakes up in the morning, and then she would feed before every nap, since she was taking 2 naps a day by then. And then she would feed before bedtime and through the night. So she was still getting a good amount of feeds, but they were basically only related to sleep. It was like before sleep. For actual meals, for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, she had a full meal or like real food. So that naturally dropped it down, right? Because now she's eating foods and she's only feeding before sleep or around sleep. And then as she gets older, she began to drop naps and also wake up less in the night. So I went from 2 naps to waking up a couple times at night to 1 nap and only waking up 1 time in the night. And it wasn't even a real wake up. She would still have her eyes closed and just get some milk and fall right back asleep. Super easy. So she got down to that. So just like 1 time in the morning, 1 nap, bedtime, 1 time at night. And by then my breasts were making like almost no milk at all. It was literally just like a little bit of comfort. And then by 20 months, I got pregnant. And she also was sleeping through the night, so no wake-ups at all. It was pretty easy. She was able to understand, so I just talked to her about it, and I was like, look, we're gonna stop breastfeeding, blah, blah, blah. And she was able to comprehend what I was talking about, so that was really good. Obviously I don't think she understood the gravity of it, like, oh, really, no breast. On the first night, she did cry a little bit, but it wasn't like a terrible hysterical cry. It was just like oh, I really want it, but I can't have it kind of cry. And I held her, I comforted her during that time, and it wasn't that long either, maybe like 5 minutes. And she does suck her thumb, which she always did. Even if she breastfed, when she was done, she would like roll over and suck her thumb. But this time, there was no breastfeeding before. She just would suck her thumb. Yeah, it was fine. The next day she cried. I actually think she cried harder the second day for whatever reason. I guess maybe it was like, oh, this is real. You really not giving me this boob. But the second day she cried. That time, I comforted her again. And then by the 3rd day, that was it. She kind of just like knew. She might have like gone for it, but then when I reminded her, it was like, oh yeah, we're not doing that anymore. The 3rd day, I was the one crying. It was just like, I don't know. You bond with your baby, you provide them their food, their connection. It's like, wow, my baby's really growing up. It was just a lot. It's like mourning. You're mourning that connection, that bond, breastfeeding. So it's like I had to grieve. I had to get sad. And then literally like 2 days later, I was like, wait a minute. oh, we're really done with this thing. And like, I was actually very happy about it. I was like, I don't have to worry about breastfeeding anymore. I don't have to like be giving my body away, all these things. So with Leia, weaning was pretty easy overall. I'm really grateful for that. And I understand that that's not the case for everybody. That was just my experience and my story with my daughter. I'm sure with my son, there'll be something different. And Leia, she's very understanding, so I was able to talk to her. But in general, I think that if you can communicate to your child, I think it's very beneficial in ending the weaning process or just like through any transition in general. And you know, there's different methods too. I know that some people put a Band-Aid over the nipple and they'll say like, oh, it's broken or it's not working. And that's how they get the child to stop. But I've also heard that doesn't work. The child will go and rip the Band-Aid right off. So the point is you just have to find what works for you. That was my experience and what worked for us. Okay, now we're gonna do like a little Q&A portion, except no one's asking me questions. I just have answers for you guys. But these are basically like common concerns or things that I came up with while I was breastfeeding. So I hope that answering these questions or addressing these concerns will help you guys out if you're on the journey and wondering like what's going on or if you're trying to prepare for breastfeeding. So I know for a lot of new moms, one of the biggest questions in the beginning is my baby even getting enough food? It can be really scary because the thing with breastfeeding is it's not like a bottle where you see, okay, there's 1 ounce in this bottle. If the bottle's empty, they ate an ounce. It's literally like you're blind to it. You're just assuming that they have enough. But the good thing is that there are concrete ways to know if your baby is feeding. Number one, if you breastfeed them and they seem pretty relaxed afterwards, then that's probably a good sign that they are content with whatever you just fed them. But that is not a very concrete sign. If you want very like objective signs, then 2 things would be their output. Are they having wet diapers? Are they having pees and poops? That's a really good sign that they're consuming their milk. And then another thing to look at would be that their weight. You want to make sure they're gaining weight over time. There is an initial dip, I think on like the 2nd day or something. Don't quote me. You can look it up or ask your doctor. But there's like a little dip. It shouldn't be that much of a dip. Just a little dip in like a couple ounces or maybe like a pound. And then they should be going up steady from there. If your baby is not gaining weight, then that's a sign that there could possibly be an issue with feeding. But as long as they're gaining and they have wet diapers, and that's a good sign. And of the 2, you more so want to look at the wet diapers because unless you have a scale, you're not gonna be able to weigh them. And you don't really want to like obsess over weighing them either. That's just gonna be like another thing to think about. So basically, if they're peeing and they're pooping, you're probably good and they're eating okay. I know when I was in the hospital, some of the postpartum nurses would have this necklace that shows you how small the baby's stomach is, and it's literally like this big. It's so small. So they don't really need what you would think in order to be full. Like we're used to having a big old meal, but a baby needs very, very little, at least like the first day or 2 or 3 to feel full. So just trust your body and know everything is more than likely okay and your body is doing what it needs to do. And on the same topic, in the beginning, when you first start breastfeeding, your body produces colostrum. So that's what your baby is drinking. It's technically not milk, it's colostrum, which is like yellow and thick. And it's really good for them to have that first milk, so to speak, because it has a lot of nutrients in it. I believe it helps like line their gut so that they can fight off any bacteria and build their immune system. And it also helps to release the meconium, which is their first poop that you'll see. It looks like really black and tarry. And releasing that meconium helps to make sure they don't get jaundice. So it's really good to get your baby to like latch and feed really soon. I think they want like within an hour of giving birth. So with feeding, I know in the beginning, a baby can feed for a long time. And sometimes it feels like, why are they feeding for so long? Like, am I producing enough? They must not be getting anything. But in the beginning, it's like, you gotta think about it. They're just learning how to eat. So they tend to eat for a much longer period in the beginning, honestly, like the first few weeks of feeding. And then over time, it'll get slower. Like now my son, he can literally eat in like less than 5 minutes. But in the beginning, of course, they were eating. My son was never too long of an eater. I feel like he never really went over like 15 minutes. But I remember my daughter would eat like 20 minutes sometimes, 30 minutes sometimes. I've heard of people's babies eating 45 minutes. So you just have to let them do their things and adjust in the beginning, which also goes over into cluster feeding, which is a really big thing that people are like freak out about. So I know I definitely experienced that. So let's start with what is cluster feeding. So cluster feeding is basically when the baby starts eating much more frequently, like every hour or every half hour, and they're on there for a much longer time, and it just, you're in your mind, you're like, they're not getting enough. But this is basically like goes back to the feedback loop we were talking about before, where your baby is needing more food, and they're also, it's like the way that you and your baby communicate to each other to say, hey, I need you to produce more milk. So your baby is, sucking more, and then eventually your body will catch up and hopefully that cluster feeding will reduce. But I think it's supposed to last like 2 or 3 days or up to a week. It shouldn't last like too long, but cluster feeding is totally normal and so many people experience it. So don't feel like something is wrong if your baby is cluster feeding. It's just you and your baby working together to increase your supply and, figure out the whole breastfeeding relationship, because it's a relationship. So another thing that can come up is mastitis. I never had like true mastitis. I think I was like on the verge, but I caught it. So mastitis is basically like inflammation of the ducts, and it typically happens when you have clogged milk inside that won't come out. For me, I knew that I was developing a problem because I felt very tender in one spot, which was one of the ducts, and if I touched it, it was hard, and it almost felt like a line. Like I can tell it was a duct going to my nipple. So once I felt that, some of the things I did were I got a warm rag, I ran it under hot water, and I put it on my breast, or you can also do a warm shower, and I would just start massaging it. Like I would start up high from the outward part of my breast and then go towards the nipple, and I would push down deeply to get a good massage, and then I would get like a pump and put it on my breast while I'm massaging to help get the milk out. But nothing is as good as your baby suck. So in the end, I would put her on my breast whenever she was ready to feed, and while she was feeding, I would literally be like digging in there and like massaging so I can help push it while she's pulling it out. It would take maybe like a day for it to be gone. Those are all like really effective in getting rid of the mastitis. But if you develop really bad mastitis and it's like really clogged and won't come out, it'll get really painful, and you'll even see redness on the outside, which I never developed, which is why I know that I never got it like that bad. But you want to catch it early, if you do get mastitis. I kind of addressed this before. I don't really have like a big freezer stash, but if you're pumping and you want to establish a really good stash, you can look into techniques like power pumping, or you can do the technique I said where you put a pump on both breasts after your child is finished feeding, and you do it for like an additional 15 or 20 minutes at the same time. Those are all ways to increase your supply so that you can produce that extra milk and store it. But if you don't produce that extra milk, like, just don't feel bad about it, because your body is just used to producing exactly what your baby needs. And so if you're not able to build up this big old stash or have all this extra milk and you don't need it, then don't feel worried or frustrated by it. But if you do want to build a stash, then that's the best way to do it. And if you have any concerns over like how much milk your baby's gonna have, then just pump immediately after your baby feeds, so that you know that you're giving your body enough time to replenish again before your baby feeds again in the next 2 or 3 hours. I know with Leia, I was really bad at pumping in the beginning because I had so much anxiety over the amount of milk I was producing. I was feeling like I don't want to pump, because if I pump out my milk, then when Leia's ready to come back and feed again, she's not going to have any milk. So it really took me a while to get comfortable with that. But I think in that instance, the best thing I could have done was to increase my supply a little bit so that I have a little extra when she's done feeding. But I was just like, I made the amount like to the T. I didn't make a drop extra to pump, at least in the early stages with Leia. And then I just want to say, don't get too wrapped up in like any rules you may hear or any opinions that you don't like or don't feel right to you deep down inside. You just have to do what works for you, because breastfeeding is a relationship between you and your baby. I mean, the opinions on breastfeeding are endless. How long you breastfeed for, it's pretty crazy. But you just have to do what works for you. Find people who support you in breastfeeding. I think that is the most important thing, having a support system just in general. With everything after having a baby, you have to have a support system. All right, so now let's get into breastfeeding supplies. So of course, if you're exclusively breastfeeding, you don't really need much to breastfeed. You really just need your breast and like 2 other things. So first off, you will for sure need nipple pads. These are like a must-have for sure. So the reason you need nipple pads is because when you're breastfeeding, you tend to leak on the opposite breast. So if the baby's feeding on this one, they suck, they simulate a letdown, which is when your body helps to like push the milk out. But you don't just have a letdown on one breast, it's on both breasts. So in order to catch the milk on the breast that the baby is not feeding on, you gotta put your nipple pad there, and it'll prevent it from, leaking all over your shirt and stuff. So there's 2 nipple pads. There's this kind of nipple pad, which is disposable, and then you also have your reusable, washable ones. I would suggest maybe getting both and then seeing which one you prefer. I've had both. The nice thing about the rewashable ones is that they're like really soft, but you have to keep up with it. These are nice because, you just use it, throw it away, and you don't have to worry about running out or being like, oh my God, I used all of them, not need to wash them, you know, but you know yourself, pick whichever's gonna work best for you. The other thing I would recommend getting is the Haka, and this acts like a passive breast pump. So when you have that letdown, milk's gonna be coming out on the other, so instead of having your nipple pad there, you could put the Haka there to catch that extra milk, and you can use this milk to store and build your stash in the fridge. It's not really gonna like stimulate your breast and tell your breast that, oh, it needs to make more milk. It's just gonna catch what's kind of naturally coming out anyways. And the way you use this is you bend the top over, you squeeze the base, grab your breast, you unroll it, let it go, and it's going to create a suction and pull some of that milk out. I think there's another milk catcher that's shaped like a breast, because it can honestly get in the way a little bit. If you think about it, if your baby's feeding here and you have this, then the bottom is hitting the baby. So it can get a little like awkward. So you can look into the breast shaped one, but this one is like the holy grail Haka. Now, if you want to pump and have a stash, which is pretty typical if you're a breastfeeding mom, of course, the first thing you need is an electric pump. This is the pump I use. It's a Spectra S1. I hope it's the S1. I love this pump. This is my go-to electric pump. I've used this through both kids. The company's pretty good too, because I actually had a malfunction in between having 2 kids, and they just sent me a replacement easily. I had to send them back my old one. They sent me a replacement, and at no cost whatsoever. It has an outlet for 2, but I just have one connected right now to show you guys. No matter how many pumps I try, I always come back to this pump. I just love this pump. It's really effective. With this, you know, you have all the controls on there. Just so you know, this middle button is to help the pump go faster, and that helps stimulate a letdown. And then once you have your letdown, you can press it again to go back to your regular slower suction, and that would just like pull your milk out regularly. Make sure that you contact your insurance company, let them know you're pregnant so you can get all the perks and so you can get your discounted rate on a pump. But with this pump, what I like about it is that it's powerful, and then also you see right now there's no cord to connect it to the wall, like no adapter. So with this, you can plug in the adapter and plug it out, which allows it to be portable. I'm not always stuck to a wall, so I can sit down anywhere and pump. And if I want to be more mobile, you can get a pumping bra, and with that you stick the phalanges into the bra, and so you're hands free. So if you want to be super mobile, then I know they have options out there like the LV. I got the Mom Cozy. As you can see, this is connected to nothing. It's shaped like a breast, and you put this over your breast like that inside your bra, and it should just pump. This is that pump mechanism. This is pretty effective, and this is only like $100 something as compared to the LV and the other brand. Those are like $400 something. I still always go back to using my Spectra, but if I needed to be on the go, or if I was like going to work or something, I would imagine this might be something that I use. I just don't feel like it pulls as well as the pump, but I mean, I guess something has to give if you're gonna try to make it mobile and hands-free, right? But let me be clear, it works really well. It's not like it is really ineffective. It does what it needs to do. Now, aside from electric pumps, you gotta have a manual pump. This is the manual pump that I have. It's the Lancino brand. I don't know what I did with the handle, so I can't find it, but this is what it looks like in real life. This one is good because it's super portable. You can stick it in your purse, put it in your car, whatever you need to do. I mean, you can use it however you please, but you gotta have this. You just put it on your breast. You don't have the handle, but you squeeze, and it works really well. Now, in order to store all your milk, of course, you're gonna need some breastfeeding storage bags. These are Clutch. They're plastic. These are also from Lancino, but you can get whatever brand as long as it's a storage bag. They do not take up a lot of space in your freezer, which is really good. And the way it opens up, like it can stand. It says lay flat, which I just learned that when looking at these. I never knew you had to lay it flat. I always have them standing up. Another thing too is you're gonna really wanna have a cooler, especially if you're someone who travels. If you just stay home, then you might not need a cooler. But if you go to work, you might wanna have a cooler for when you're traveling from work to home, or if you're someone who travels on the airplane a lot, or suspect that you might go on trips and need to have travel with breast milk so that it's not defrosting and melting, and that your breast milk stays cool during the traveling. Because I believe that they don't recommend refreezing milk. Like if you froze it and then defrosted it, they don't recommend you putting it back in the freezer again. I never looked up why, I just know it's a recommendation. So having a cooler is really good to have. And then of course, you're gonna need a bottle. This is the bottle that I love. It's a Como Tomo bottle. It's made out of silicone, which is nice because it's safe for food consumption, and you wanna make sure, of course, your baby is not consuming anything harmful. And I know plastic is not the best thing, especially if you're gonna be heating things up. It also has a wide neck, and it's shaped like a nipple or similar to a nipple. So these are really good for breastfeeding moms. I love these. I use these through both kids. If you're going to be putting frozen milk milk in here, not necessarily in here, but cold milk in here, or if you want to defrost milk from the freezer, then you also might want to have a bottle warmer. Not a must-have, because you can really just get hot water on the stove and defrost it in that warm water. You don't want boiling water though. You're not supposed to heat up your breast milk with boiling water. Otherwise, you can get an actual bottle warmer. This is the Avant Philips, or the Philips Avant bottle warmer. This is really good. It fits a Komotoma bottle inside, and I would pretty much say this is like a universal pump. It could probably fit just about any bottle. Did I say pump? I mean, this is a good bottle warmer if you're looking for one. You'll also want to get a bottle brush cleaner, because it can be kind of hard to get into the bottom of bottles, and that just helps make it easier. And then last but definitely not least is water. You need your water. Oh my God, I have never been thirsty like I've been thirsty with breastfeeding. I don't care if you run marathons, if you work out, do CrossFit, you will never be thirsty like breastfeeding thirst. It is crazy, but I mean, it makes sense because you're feeding your baby, you need water, you're recovering from giving birth. But yeah, it's the thirstiest you'll ever be. So make sure you have a nice fat bottle of water at the side of your bed and walking around with you everywhere you go, because you have to stay hydrated. You will feel thirsty like you've never been before. So before I end this video, I want to make sure that I mention resources. As you guys know, I reached out to a lactation consultant during my journey, and I could not have continued without her. I don't know how I would have done it. So, you know, a lactation consultant, of course, is a great resource, but not everyone can access a lactation consultant. So another thing to do would be to reach out to your hospital and see if they offer any resources for breastfeeding assistance that are usually free. You can, of course, go online. You can find Facebook support groups. I believe there are a lot of those. You could also go to YouTube, where there's a lot of people who give their journey or give tips, and there's even like professionals on there who give tips. And then there's also the La Leche League. They have a lot of resources for breastfeeding moms, and it's a very pro breastfeeding friendly website for basically like any information, any topic, any question you could think of. They're pretty much on there. And I think that they might even have groups or leagues, or whatever you want to call it, in different states or cities. So look into that. But if you have any questions for me, you can drop them in the comment section below. I will answer them to my best ability. And if I don't have the answer, maybe there's someone who's watching it who can give you some advice. I know how breastfeeding can be. It can be such a journey for people. And I think that we all need to be a community and help each other out so that we can have the best experience possible. But yeah, good luck to you all. Thank you guys for watching my video. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe, or share to someone who you think might need this video. I appreciate you all, and see you guys next week.